Thumbs up. All right, here we go. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you're connecting from today. Very happy to have you on the line. For those of you who don't know me yet, I'm Inherit Lang. I'm the Executive Director of PHAP. That's short for the International Association of Professionals in Humanitarian Assistance and Protection. Very glad to be serving once again as your co-host for this third event in a series of learning sessions co-organized between PHAP and ICVA. This is, again, the third session in a stream on humanitarian coordination, where we're focusing together with ICVA on the value of NGO-led collective action to improve humanitarian coordination through NGO forums and consortia. I'm really pleased also to have once again with me as co-host Emmanuel Osmond, who's Senior Policy Officer with ICVA. Great to be with you again, Emmanuel.
Thank you very much, Inherit, and hello to everyone. I'm also very pleased to be here with you today.
Excellent. So just a quick note about this event. So it's, of course, made possible through this collaboration between PHAP and made possible by the contribution of ICVA, as well as the Geneva Humanitarian Connector, which is an initiative of PHAP supported by the Swiss Federal Department of Foreign Affairs, precisely to build the kinds of connections and share information just as we're planning to do in the next 90 minutes. And I'll ask my co-host Emmanuel to give us a bit of an overview.
Today we're going to look at NGO fora and NGO consortia that are collectively aiming for better and more timely response by strengthening humanitarian coordination in many different ways that we will see throughout today's session. We are currently witnessing an increase in their number and relevance at all levels, at the local level, national, regional, and at the global level. Today's first presentation will provide us with an overview of what exactly is an NGO forum and what exactly is an NGO consortium. Then we will have two presentations describing two cases of fora, one in Myanmar and another one in Somalia. Then a presentation from Syria Relief will follow, explaining the importance and the challenges of NGO networks in the context of the Syria response. And last but not least, after the presentation, we will ask your questions during the Q&A session. So don't hesitate to submit all your questions at any time during the event.
Excellent. And to help us with this really interesting discussion that we have coming up, we're very pleased to have with us a number of expert speakers on the line. First of all, really pleased to welcome Raphael Gorju, who is the ICVA Director of Program and Policy as of October 2015. Raphael represents ICVA in key global forums such as the IASC Emergency Directors Group as well as the IASC Working Group. Also very pleased to have on the line Pansy Tuntin, who's currently serving as Executive Director of the Local Resource Center, known as LRC, which is an umbrella network of over 600 civil society organizations in Myanmar. She also serves as National Advisor of the Gender Equality Network, GEN, comprising over 130 civil society organizations, local and international NGOs.
It is also my pleasure to introduce the two other speakers, Abdurrahman Sharif, who is the Director of the Somalia NGO Consortium, which is a network of over 80 international and local NGOs working in Somalia. He's currently also a member of the Somalia Humanitarian Conflict Team, HTT, and of the Advisory Board of the Somalia Humanitarian Fund, SHF. I also introduce Rula Hinedi, who is the Media and Advocacy Manager for Syria Relief and Head of the Gaziantep office in Turkey. Previously, she has worked extensively with the United Nations in conflict and post-conflict zones.
Excellent. And now for our first presentation, we will give the floor over to Raphael.
Thank you very much for inviting me today. For my presentation, I will start with some basis of what an NGO consortium and an NGO forum is. So usually we consider that an NGO consortium or NGO forum is a collective initiative promoted by NGO in order to promote collective NGO action. So it's NGO coming together to try to move forward some issues of common interest. A consortium, a forum could be of a different size and structure. It could be very small with only a volunteer doing that in addition to their usual work. or it could be some more structured organization with a secretariat of few people and some very specific and dedicated staff. The issue and the focus an NGO consortium or forum can work on can vary as well a lot according to what NGO decide to actually invest on as a collective. And in terms of membership, of course, the members of an NGO consortium or NGO forum are NGOs, but we could imagine in some forum or consortium having some international NGOs only, some national NGOs only, a composition of both. There are plenty of examples that we can eventually highlight. I might take the opportunity to do that throughout the presentation. Usually, the difference that we make between an NGO forum and an NGO consortium, we speak about NGO forum in country where there is a humanitarian response taking place. And when NGO comes together at the regional or global level, we usually speak about NGO consortium. So there is no official definition of an NGO consortium or NGO forum, but usually that's the difference we make. NGO forum in country where there is a humanitarian response, NGO consortium for an organization working at regional or global level. If we go very quickly through what an NGO forum is and does, and I know that some of my colleagues will speak about it later. So an NGO forum aims to support NGOs undertaking humanitarian action in a specific country, and usually NGO forum operating in country focus on supporting NGOs to better navigate the national administrative and legal frameworks in a country. We speak about how an NGO could get registered in a country, what are the legal requirements for an NGO to operate in a country. Another objective that NGO forum usually focuses on is to facilitate collective NGO representation with key fora and stakeholders. So I especially think here about humanitarian country team or representing NGO before the Ministry of Planning in a country. And the third main objective that an NGO forum could have, again, usually, is to facilitate and support collective NGO advocacy issues in country. It is very rare that actually an NGO forum could engage in proper operational coordination in countries. This is usually the role of OCHA. I won't spend too much detail on what an NGO forum is. Again, my colleague will go a little bit more into details. When it comes to NGO consortia, so as I said, they operate mainly at regional and global level. Usually they are thematic oriented. They focus less on country-specific topics and more on regional and global issues and policies. And their objective is really to echo NGO perspective and to facilitate participation in key regional, global and thematic debates. When we speak about an NGO consortium here, we do not speak about a consortium of NGO coming together to present a proposal to a donor, but really about a large number of NGO coming together to create a structure that will look at improving NGO collective action and advocacy. I just would like to mention a few of them. For instance, we can speak about the NGO consortium called Voice, who is bringing together European NGOs, and one of its main focus is to partner and work with the European Union and especially ECHO to bring forward NGO perspective. Another consortium is a NIA network that was created last year at the World Humanitarian Summit, tried to bring together local organization. Or another example could be Asia Pacific Refugee Rights Network based out of Bangkok and trying to work with different NGOs on promoting rights for refugees. Another example, of course, of NGO consortium is ICVA. So as you may know, ICVA was created actually in 1955 and is considered the only global network of humanitarian NGOs. It has about 100 members and composed both of international NGOs and national NGOs, but as well composed of NGOs fora. And ICVA, usually the way I present ICVA is a bridge between NGO and the global sector of the global level of the humanitarian sector, trying to put forward NGO voices that NGO could actually shape the future of the humanitarian system. And ICVA focuses on four main areas which are defined by its member: for displacement, humanitarian coordination, humanitarian financing, and humanitarian partnership. So this very brief presentation, I just wanted to give some main bases on how we could present what is an NGO consortium and what is an NGO forum. And just to finish with my presentation, I just would like to end with few conclusion of the importance of collective NGO action. We can really see that having NGO coming together could definitely contribute to shaping the future of humanitarian action. We are in a system which is mainly led by the United Nations and donors, so it's really important that NGO could actually put forward their view and bring forward the field reality they actually face on a day-to-day basis. Another important aspect of collective NGO action is to ensure that we do bring forward diverse perspective. NGO is not one entity. There are a lot of different NGOs, so it's important that we can actually reflect the different views of this community. And of course, investing in collective NGO action is the possibility to share experience and to share resources as well. Nevertheless, that's not easy because NGOs are very diverse. So often we have to find a thin balance to actually try to promote collective interest over organizational interest. And I just would like to finish to say that the potential for stronger NGO collective action is actually massive, which is something we may want to invest even more in the future. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Raphael. And just before we move to our next presentation, I think it was a great way to get us started, and I'm really appreciating the input on the polls here as well. So first of all, on the thematic focus areas of ICVA, I guess this might reflect also the theme of today's event, but it really it looks like there is a tremendous interest among participants today in the focus of ICVA on humanitarian coordination. So that's very good to see that we're able to be responsive to that need with this partnership, and also now seeing some very encouraging results coming in the current poll with a fairly strong agreement with the idea that this diversity that you highlighted, Raphael, among NGOs really is a strength, although it looks like there certainly is some possibility to discuss further those strengths as well as potential weaknesses. So now let's move on to our next expert presentation. We're turning to Pansy, Executive Director with the Local Resource Center. Pansy, I give the floor over to you.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for getting me on this webinar. I'm very happy to participate in this event. We would like to, it is really a very great pleasure for us to share Myanmar NGO fora and consortia experiences in Myanmar. As a background, we would like to share with you that in Myanmar, the civil society, existence of civil society is really very, very much diverse, and civil society is very much mobilized and also very dynamic, and this was especially evident in past national disasters such as the Cyclone Nargis, which hit Myanmar in May 2008. Of course, it was a terrible loss of life and property, but Cyclone Nargis actually did provide the opportunity for significant development in Myanmar civil society. Some of these developments include the civil society, the way the civil society is operationalizing today, which is now more organized and it interacts better with different stakeholders, and it now has stronger networks and better trust building, especially between the external actors as well as the internal ones. And as a result, civic space today is bigger, it is more complex, but more integrated. Since Cyclone Nargis, the civil society learned to work together in a more coordinated and systematic manner with especially the international community and other stakeholders. As for the operational space for civil society in Myanmar, CSOs are very diverse here. We estimate it to have around over 10,000 active CSOs and local NGOs in the country. And of course, having been under the military government for the last 6 decades had somehow restricted the movement or the operational space of the civil society. And it was, like I said, it was really the nuggets, which was like a wake-up call for the government to give more space to the civil society. And above that, NGOs, a government also operate their own NGOs. They are called government-operated NGOs with some funding from the government. On the other hand, the other type of NGOs are not receiving any funding from the government. Additionally, there are restrictive laws and policies, especially in relation to freedom of assembly, association, and expression. Of course, all of this contribute to the limited CSO operation in the country. First of all, we had the Association Registration Act of 1988, which was really a draconian and very punitive law that actually punished the unregistered civil society for at least 3 years of jail term for operating without registration. So therefore, in 2014, immediately after the new government came into place, the civil society got together and led the process of revising the association registration law. And the new law had removed some of the barriers that are restricting civic action in the country. The new law is more progressive, it is easier to register, and it is less time consuming as well as less costly. It used to cost around over $500 for an NGO to register. It is now only maximum $100, and therefore this is a good progress. But still, we are challenged with other issues relating to the delays by the Ministry of Home Affairs to actually come up with the development of the bylaws, which came out only 1 year after the law was adopted in 2015. And worst of all, the new law, there has been some delay in actually implementing or being enforced at the regional, subnational level. Of course, there are also many other challenges for civil society organizations in Myanmar. Here, I'd like to highlight that there is really a need to have or to increase better relationship and increase coordination among the local CSOs ourselves. Also, with the influx of donor funding that came in after the new government came in place, that somehow created more competition rather than improving coordination among the civil society. We also need to gain the trust of the government, especially the new government. And therefore, we need to really unify our forces together, since we need to be united to have a collective effort from all humanitarian actors. We need to have joint advocacy, and we need to have constructive dialogue. But so far, many of the actors, different humanitarian actors in Myanmar, we lack that unity that is very much needed. Also, local CSOs are very much challenged by the exclusion of local CSOs in the International NGO Forum. This had really been a challenge because it was really dividing the international and locals to work together. So the local civil society continued, and we advocated for many, many years. After 3 years of advocating and lobbying, we were, with the help of the international pressure provided through, especially ICVA, I would like to give the credit to ICVA, and as well as the UN Rapporteur, that really facilitated the inclusion of local CSOs in the HCT in Myanmar. Today, we have 4 local CSOs as HCT members, and this is really the highest number that I believe in the world. Please allow me to tell you a little bit about the Local Resource Center, which I'm heading. It is an umbrella network of over actually 1,000 members, because we have around 600 members operating in about 5 different regions, and many of these regions are either conflict or post-conflict areas, and together with members that are being represented in 20 thematic networks that LRC is linked to, such as the Land Core Group, the Food Security Working Group, Gender Equality Network, Education Network, and Health Network, etc. The total numbers that we estimate is around 1,000 LRC members. And with regard to the preference of the NGOs to participate in LRC activities, they have indicated that they are happy in getting the updated information and regular resource materials provided through the LRC, and also that they take connected with the NGO community, especially being connected to the regional and international initiatives such as the ASEAN People's Forum, the World Humanitarian Summit, and ICVA activities, etc. Also, there is a need to have more increased coordination among the NGOs. Actually, both local and international NGOs need to come together because the new government has established a national coordination system known as Development Assistance Coordination Unit, and LRC is actually a lead member in one of the cooperation partnership group, which actually reports directly to the Development Assistance Coordination Unit. Also, local resource center has some added value for the members because we are linked to other regional and international platforms. However, the lack of its membership in the INGO forum actually is very much affecting the coordination work of the NGO fora in the country. So therefore, the local NGOs continue to advocate for this issue. And to get around, we advocated for inclusion of local NGOs in the HCT. And therefore, this has provided us with a better platform to be engaged with the international NGOs through the HCT so that we know what's happening in the country with regards to humanitarian planning and the humanitarian response. And in conclusion, I would like to highlight the need for the NGOs to adhere to the principles of partnership. This should really be honored and also practiced by all the NGOs in Myanmar. And also we must ensure the principles of equality, transparency, results-oriented approach, responsibility, as well as complementarity. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Pansy. We have a question that's come in for you, building on some of the challenges that you raised. Before getting to the question, I just want to highlight we did have a poll running as you were speaking, and it does appear that really all of the challenges that you were pointing to are really experienced by those of us who are participating in the event today. Particularly coming at the top of the list would be lack of coordination and communication among organizations, followed closely by competition between NGOs. So a couple of really important points that you're bringing to light there. So we have a question that's come in from Bodo, who's participating live today, asking if you might have some examples. Pansy, you mentioned the problem of exclusion of local CSOs in international NGO forums. Did you have any particular examples in mind, or where are you seeing this kind of problem play out in particular?
We have been advocating to get an NGO seat in the INGO forum, and for many years we have not succeeded. So therefore, the INGO forum is actually limited to only the INGOs who are participating in discussions, and also they make plans for Myanmar for both humanitarian and development activities. However, local NGOs are not participating in this process. Does that answer the question of Bodo?
It does, and we actually just had a follow-up question from Fiona asking, do you have any idea of why that might be the case? What would be the reasoning behind the exclusion?
As far as we understand, I have really I've been trying to advocate for the last 5 years for this inclusion of NGOs in INGO forum, but I have been told by some that INGO forum should be exclusively for INGOs because they feel that there's really no need to have any kind of interaction at that level, and that they send their INGO representative, a local representative, to our local NGO meetings, bi-weekly meetings, but it's not reciprocal. So this is what we are trying to tell them, that we also need to sit in their forum, but we are told that really they are not ready for that.
Okay, Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. We have some great questions coming in. I just have one more, and then we will move on so that we don't run out of time. But a great question coming in from Naama, who is so referring to your point regarding the lack of government funding for some NGOs, and this being a limiting factor for NGOs. She's wondering, is there also the opposite effect? Is there also a problem of NGOs receiving funding from the government, but then being limited in their ability, for example, to be independent and potentially to challenge the government? That you
This is
find?
what we call the Congos in our country. They are the government-organized NGOs, and they are receiving some funding from the government, and therefore they become the extended arm of the government, and therefore they are not independent. They have to really operate under the guidance of the government, and this is really the issue that we are facing here in Myanmar.
Absolutely. And then the follow-up from Nama was just the question of to what extent consortia are able to make a difference in this particular respect.
Because we are now trying to advocate to the government collectively for the need for the NGOs to also receive some kind of funding for sustainability. And this issue is still in discussion. Nothing much has really come out of these various types of dialogues that we have had with the government, but we are also taking another initiative of getting the private sector on board, which means we would like to have a tripartite partnership, the NGOs, the private sector, and the government. So if we can get all these consortium to also include private sector, the government is very much for inclusion of the business sector. So this would have a more buy-in from the government, I believe.
Thank you so much. Really interesting. I think we could go on for a long time, but we will now move to get another perspective from another part of the world. So very pleased to give the floor to Abdurrahman Sharif, Director of the Somalia NGO Consortium. Abdurrahman, over to you.
Thanks a lot, and I hope you can hear me well because I'm in Mogadishu and the internet connection has had problems for some days here. So maybe just to start by saying the Somalia NGO Consortium, although it has the consortium in its name, is an NGO fora that has been around since the late 90s. I think it has. It's one of the oldest ones that exists, and basically it has at the moment works in a particular way because we're based between two countries, Kenya and Somalia. Kenya, where obviously all the donors are at the moment. Most of the country directors, also the NGOs, are based, and some of the UN also coordination meetings occur and happen in Nairobi, and then offices in 3 regions of Somalia, in Puntland, in Somaliland, and then in Mogadishu. Although there's been in the past, an increased amounts of meetings, coordination meetings happening at Nairobi level, now this has gradually been changing, where most of the meetings are actually happening at Mogadishu. So we're in between two countries, as I say. And as Emmanuel explained it earlier, before we represent over 80 local and international NGOs, although the membership of local NGOs has been increasing gradually, and I think we'll reach about 100 members this year, and focused around 4 key areas particularly. So being a representative body for predominantly the members we represent, and influencing, decision makers. So we have a seat, for example, on the humanitarian country team, a standing seat which is different from the seats that the NGOs have. Glad to hear that Myanmar has 4 local NGO representatives. We have 2 in Somalia that are fixed, and then 4 NGOs, although we're exploring changes in that representation as well. Coordination, because we have platforms in all of these regions where we again engage our members. We have monthly meetings where we discuss, common challenges being faced, or latest updates in our operations, in the policy development, in issues that are arising from the humanitarian and development work. And there are monthly meetings, loyal ad hoc meetings, and meetings with country directors that are organized on a regular basis in all of the regions in which we work. We also carry out a lot of advocacy, and since the beginning of the year, year, we've been, at the forefront of advocacy on the risk of famine in Somalia. Been present on a number of platforms, the London Conference, there was the Berlin Humanitarian Call, and a number of other international conferences where we've been invited to raise the issues that Somalia faces. And then the final point is more about, information sharing and making sure that our members have all the information and relevant information regarding, their operations in Somalia, all the latest updates, information coming from both all the stakeholders we work with, be it NGOs, the UN, the government, and obviously international stakeholders as well. Now, we've just come up, obviously, with a revision of our strategy. We have put in place a new strategy, 3-year strategy, looking at the context in Somalia and how things are evolving. And this is what I wanted to talk about a bit more now in the 2 slides that are coming, and evolving around 3 main areas. The first one is around the enabling environment for improved humanitarian resilience and development outcomes through multi-stakeholder and multi-level engagement. So that means engagement with all the actors I referenced, and ensuring that there is the space for NGOs to be able to operate in the right way with the limited amounts of challenges and so on, but also whenever there are challenges, raise them at the appropriate level so that they can be addressed. So some of the challenges, for example, we face is around, illegal requests of taxation from different regional states, registration, costs, but also what we call lots of bureaucratic impediments. So, for instance, since the beginning of the year, we faced about 50 bureaucratic impediments just facing NGOs, and this range from requests for taxation, delays in clearance of supplies at ports or airports, checkpoints on roadblocks, in addition to other stuff that are related to security, staff kidnapping, and threats imposed or challenges imposed on NGOs. The second strand of work we want to work on is more around accountability and transparency in Somalia through the application of international and good practices and standards. This is more revolved about, obviously, the challenge of operating in Somalia. Somalia is a high-risk environment with the potentials of corruption, being there, the potential of aid diversion and so on, and about being able to assist our NGOs in better understanding those dynamics, but also better dealing with those dynamics. And obviously, because we have so many members, the capacities of NGOs differ from one another. And when I talk, for example, about accountability and transparency, we talk about risk management and risk capacity. And there are large organizations, our membership, medium-sized organizations, and smaller organizations. And the needs and understanding of these practices differ from one another. Then it's also about ensuring that there's promotion and implementation of global, regional, and national commitments. We're focusing now a lot on localization and the localization agenda, which my colleague from Myanmar mentioned quite a lot, and how we can enhance the voice and capacity of local actors, not just necessarily national NGOs, but there's the government that's more involved in humanitarian and disaster management, and how also they can benefit from these discussions around localization per se, but also that we assume a lot that we have lots of decisions that are made at the international level, be it the World Humanitarian Summit, be it now the comprehensive response framework on refugees, that our colleagues will necessarily follow up or understand, and that's generally not the case. And so we have to act also as bridges sometimes in making people, making our members, agencies aware of what's been discussed at the global framework, what the international community is agreeing, the standards that are being developed, and putting them into practice and see how they can be put into practice here. So maybe one of the things I just wanted to highlight is maybe one thing that came out of our strategic review process is around the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats we face, so that at least you understand a bit, how we work on a day-to-day basis. And one of the strengths, obviously, for us as a fora that we've seen is that, for example, that we have a mix of local, national, and international NGOs, the good leadership in terms of, having support from country directors and being, engaging and interacting on a regular basis with country directors at field level, being responsive to membership. So whenever there are issues that are raised by our members, be it on challenges, taxation, things that they want to raise with donors and and so on, always be there to deliver them. The reputation and credibility that we have because of the membership, obviously, respect from both donors, government, UN agencies that we interact with, and I'd say not just on the Somali level, but now also more regionally. We're engaging with IGAD and a number of regional platforms, but as well as internationally with a number of platforms as well. Also a good understanding, obviously, of the local context, both in the capitals, but also in the regions of Somalia, and also success in reactive advocacy and influence. Some of the weaknesses I think that we face on a daily basis is more around expectation and managing expectations and needs of memberships. Sometimes there's high expectation from us, and our capacity doesn't allow us to engage in everything that is necessarily raised by members. We have limited, obviously, as our colleague also from Myanmar mentioned, representation of local national NGOs in decision-making processes. We've revised this, so now we have a steering committee, a board that I report to, that is composed of 3 INGOs and 3 national NGOs, and we're looking at how we can better improve representation of national NGOs in decision-making level. We have a challenge is that now the context in Somalia is that the approach is very decentralized. There's a federal system, and states are now taking more decisions, and so that causes us sometimes to have strategies based on each state level and not a national strategy of interaction or dealing on the issues on a daily basis. And then our approach has been more reactive rather than proactive. For instance, so for example, when the government comes with a request, for taxation, we've been more reactive to those requests rather than being proactive in, trying to deal with this taxation issue before the government raises it itself as an issue. And then trying to increase also evidence and our advocacy based on evidence and research and collecting information from all the members we have around some of the practical challenges can prove to be challenging. And then around opportunities that come up and where we feel we have an added value is now the government has developed a national development plan. What's engagement with the NGOs, wants them to lead and NGOs to follow up and support that process in around supporting, for example, the establishment of an NGO policy, NGO Act, which is non-existent at the moment in Somalia, but also building stakeholder relationships with the different stakeholders that are involved. Again, an opportunity also to make some change and difference around the discussions around localization because of the credibility that the consortium have, and also this decentralized approach that we may use more effectively. Some of the challenges that we face overall are around bureaucratic impediments, which I mentioned, insecurity, access concerns, because still we have 1/3 to 1/2 of the country that is predominantly inaccessible at the time where there's a high risk of famine. The recurring shocks that happen in Somalia, which, as you know, it's the 3rd time likely that Somalia may face famine in less than 25 years. The risks, and also, for example, in this discussion around, humanitarian development focus, there's a lot of concerns about losing focus on humanitarian principles and perceptions of neutrality, and obviously corruption, over risk management, and also something we want to see how we can work on is the limited voice of vulnerable groups, we call them, which include women, youth, and others in terms of minority clans, people with disabilities, and a number of range of groups. One of the things I think is also a challenge that's not necessarily mentioned here, but I know from other colleagues who run and manage NGO coordination fora, is sometimes the difficulty in highlighting why and how critical these NGO foras are, and sometimes this becomes difficult. So we struggle sometimes to have regular sources of funding to maintain this type of work, which is vital for the NGOs to keep on their operations, but also engagement with the different range of stakeholders. And so it becomes difficult. And the other challenge is that we are generally perceived as a humanitarian coordination body, but our membership, in our membership we have humanitarian development, peace building NGOs, although 80% here certainly of the membership is humanitarian, but it gets difficult. For example, if you develop a 3-figure strategy to work on, based on annual humanitarian funding, and making the case for the importance of these NGO fora generally becomes difficult. And the example we always give is, what if there were no NGO forums? How would the environment be? It would be extremely difficult. There's without any doubt, for NGOs to engage, but this would be extremely difficult also for the stakeholders, be it donors, UN, and so on, to understand in the right way the challenges that the country faces and where they need to work on better, they need to invest their money better, and so on. I guess what I'll do is I'll just stop there and take any questions if there are any. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, Abdulrahman, and thank you for highlighting this last point. We've got a few follow-up questions actually, and one is coming from Fiona Gall in Afghanistan, and she would like to know, what do you think is the most important role that Somalia Consortium has at the moment from your four main activities?
I'd say probably one of the most critical is the advocacy. Side that we do, and actually because of that advocacy, we've managed to gain a lot of respect from the number of stakeholders and credibility from a number of stakeholders, and continue to highlight the issues that Somalia faces. And I think that's a critical part of it as well. But also I think it's also the representation that having that voice. And sometimes, for donors and UN agencies, it's easier to have, one voice to speak to rather than a multitude of voices to speak to. So I'd say those are the two most important things. And maybe because I saw a point, there was a question before Emmanuel on the coordination, and that there's a lack of coordination overall. I know that 90% of people voted saying that there's a lack of coordination. My opinion is not that. I wouldn't say that there's a lack of coordination. I think there's a lack of understanding what coordination really means. I think there are also competing priorities around different actors that are involved in coordination. But also, one thing I want to highlight is that coordination and information sharing, the practical things we try and do on a daily basis, is not an easy thing to deal with. And there is a lot of work that we need to invest, a lot of things we need to do in trying to improve that coordination.
Indeed. Thank you, Abdulrahman, and that's why also we are doing those learning streams on humanitarian coordination to explain further. I have another follow-up question for you. What efforts and approaches are being adopted towards the localization agenda? How local agencies are being made aware of these global commitments and processes on the localization agenda?
So in the Somalia context, we've taken an approach, I think, since the World Humanitarian Summit happened and even before, to engage the local NGOs on this process, at least make them aware. And what we realized at the beginning is that most of them were not aware of these commitments. We organized workshops with some of these local NGOs in Mogadishu, Garowe, and Hargeisa to highlight what we discussed at the WHS and what messages they could pass on in the international community. And we just finalized the workshop actually in Nairobi, funded by the Humanitarian Leadership Academy, where 12 donors attended and 15 local NGOs from the different regions of Somalia. And now we just got a commitment from DFID that we're going to do a follow-up event in Mogadishu, a bigger one, focusing on government, private sector, not just local NGOs. So there's a lot of work on awareness raising, but also making NGOs understand where they fit best and how better they can help implement these dynamics. That's if you remember, I mentioned that local NGOs, there were a few local NGOs in our representative body. That engagement has helped actually increase the local NGOs. And the feeling is I think maybe in Myanmar as well had that, for example, the NGO consortium was predominantly representing INGOs and things like that. And the fact is, and this is what I said to a lot of the local NGOs, is that, for example, most of our membership is composed of international NGOs. So naturally, that means that it may represent more INGOs. But if we want to change the trend, we need also more local NGOs and national NGOs to join the consortium so that we can balance it out. And that's what we're working on as we speak at the moment. And I think what also donors are telling us and so on is, let's not just focus on the funding side of it, and focus also on increasing the voice and other things we can do to develop, and implement this localization agenda in the Somalia context. I would certainly agree with that comment, but also disagree because, yes, funding is not the main issue, but everything around the engagement of local NGOs has also to do with funding because of the limited resources they have, for example, to deal with advocacy, to represent, to be represented in the level in the different platforms because of their small capacity. to do so. So there's a lot of work that we're doing, and we are a bit lucky because the NEAR network is based, not far from us in Nairobi, and Adeso, who's the host of the NEAR network, is one of our main members. So there's a lot of work we're doing on the localization and planning to do more in coming period.
Thank you, Abdurrahman. And last question before moving to the next speaker. We would like to know how you navigate yourself between this kind of constituency composed of both international and national NGOs, and how you overcome the challenges of having such a constituency.
I guess you need to be a diplomat to deal with some of these challenging. I think it's not easy, but I think when you sitting at the HCT or when you're in different platforms, and it's making sure that you balance and you don't not only address the needs of international organizations but also national. And I think that's where we're trying to work a bit harder. So it's I think so long as you're aware that those dynamics exist and those there is those sensitivities exist, I think you'd be able to manage it better. So it's leveraging around it, but also it's getting ownership. So for example, in this strategy that we've just developed, which has a work strand and work focus on localization, it's approved by all our members in our steering committee that includes in large part international NGOs. So they're very much supportive of it and supportive of this localization agenda, and I think it's just making the case. But what we realized is that a lot of the challenges come with people not knowing each other, people not talking to each other. So we're trying to promote as much platforms as possible where the different range of stakeholders can talk to each other, both donors with local NGOs, with the government, with the INGOs, and this I think has helped a lot in building some sort of a trust relationship in the context. It's not easy. I think you just need to be aware of the sensitivities. You must certainly follow the context very closely and be some sort of a diplomat in the sector. That's all. Thank you.
Terrific, and thank you so much, Abdurrahman. A really interesting conversation, and it's triggered some terrific discussion as well. I see in the chat we have a great thread going now on the concept of coordination that you highlighted. There was perhaps a need for some discussion, and now we have also a poll up to gather some more insights on that point. So now moving to our next guest, very pleased to have with us today Rola Henedi, Media and Advocacy Manager and Head of the Gaziantep office in Turkey for Syria relief. Rola, I give you the floor. Over to you. Okay, we seem to be missing the audio. We'll give it just another moment here. See if we can fix the connection with Rola.
Okay, so meanwhile, while we are still waiting for Rola to be connected, let me ask a question to Abdurrahman, if you're still online and your audio is on, Abdurrahman. We've got a follow-up question on your presentation. Would the Somalia NGO consortium benefit from and have the capacity to manage a direct contact with the Interagency Standing Committee, the IASC?
I think it will be a bit difficult for us to have that sort of relationship, and I think the approach we prefer to do that is to do it via ICVA and Interaction, who have representation in the different platforms of the IASC, and I think that's the easiest way to do it, because ICVA has the right relationships and networks and experience to do so. And I think that's why the NGO consortium is a member of ICVA, and that's why on an annual basis we work with Interaction, and as well as participate in the annual workshop they organize for all the coordination bodies, and I think that's the best approach. But it's also to make sure that because of ICVA's relationship with the other NGOs as well that are members of it, and Interaction as well, also that there is a lot of information sharing between what's happening in Somalia and the different platforms, and I think that's in my opinion that's the best way to deal with these dynamics.
Great, thank you for that. And now, in the meantime, I believe we do now have a phone connection with Rola. So we'll try again to give the floor over to you, Rola. Are you on the line?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, that sounds just perfect now. So over to you. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you all, and apologies, there seems to be a technical glitch. I'm going to start by giving you a very brief overview of the humanitarian response from Turkey, the cross-border response into Syria, and then I will will get more into the topic more deeply. So until 2011, the conflict started in 2011, and until 2014, the response was totally NGO-led. Despite what Rafael was saying earlier, coordination is usually done by OCHA, but OCHA was not yet present in Turkey until the 14th of July 2014, when the Security Council unanimously adopted Resolution 2165, authorizing the cross-border response. So hubs were created in neighboring countries, so in Turkey, in Iraq, in Jordan, and in Lebanon. And then OCHA set up its operation in Turkey, in Gaziantep, and set up the cluster system, which we started working with since. There's also the whole of Syria approach, which encompasses the whole response for all the Syrian territory across all the hubs, including Damascus. So many stakeholders are involved, as you can imagine. And even before OCHA started coming, they started grouping themselves in foras and consortia at both local, regional, and global level. So on the local level, there were dozens of alliances, networks of Syrian NGOs that created, and the NGO Forum, which started in 2012, so 2 years before OCHA came. The year after, the SURF was created at the regional level, which is a Syria INGOs forum that groups all the 5 hubs now for organizations working in all neighboring countries and including inside Syria from Damascus. Then the cluster system started, covering, as I mentioned earlier, the whole of Syria level, and at global level, lots of other organizations are doing advocacy for the Syria crisis at different levels. So, as you know, needs are huge in Syria at all levels, in all sectors, in all areas, and the international organizations present in Turkey were able to cross border before and implement their operations in person until the border closed and it was too dangerous for foreigners to cross into Syria. So then all the implementation was transferred to local NGOs, who are the only ones that today can cross border and enter into the country to implement projects for both INGOs partners, for donors, and for the UN. So this has strengthened a lot the capacity of the Syrian NGOs, who are the only ones that now can work inside Syria and who have been transferred all the risks, both security, safety, and all other risks related to an active conflict zone as is Syria today. Now, why Syria Relief? We want to join forums both locally, regionally, and internationally. What is the added value for us? Now, it's always better to be on the same page with peers and with people speaking the same language and acting on the same response. As Syria Relief, we believe a lot in coordination, in networking, in advocacy, so we try to be present as much as we can, and we have dedicated staff and a dedicated budget to participate in as much events and networks as possible. So I'm going to focus on 2 of the networks at local level, which are the SNA, the Syrian NGO Alliance, which is the biggest or one of the biggest Syrian NGO alliances in Turkey. So with Syrian NGOs working on the Turkey response, it represents around 19 of the biggest NGOs present here and covering almost 40% of the total response. And on the NGO Forum, which is more of an INGO forum, but contrary to other countries, they do accept local NGOs, and actually local NGOs are very present in the NGO Forum. So both of them are at local level in Turkey, and what we get out of them, first of all, is advocacy. So we're always speaking with one voice, makes your voice much louder. Networking, because we get to meet not only colleagues working in other local NGOs, but also improve our relationship with partners and donors. Lots of support, coordination, lessons learned. We share experiences. We help each other and discuss issues that are common to all of us. Sometimes, especially with the Syrian NGOs, when there's a big emergency, we still do coordination, and I will give an example later. And as I mentioned, lessons learned and information sharing, which is one of the biggest, one of the most important things we do within the forum. Now, what are the challenges? As you can all imagine, challenges are present everywhere. I'm going to focus on the main one. First, is that people have different priorities, organizations have different interests, especially between local and international organizations. And it is always a challenge to try to bring everybody together. Another one is the decision-making and this decision-taking mechanisms that are different. And very often you have to act and respond or take a stand very quickly, and some organizations have to go back to their HQs for approval or not approval. The third issue I would mention is the time constraint. Usually it's a very fast turnaround for input. You receive an email in the evening, we are sending out tomorrow this advocacy letter. You have 24 hours to give your input and to decide if you want to sign it or not. Sometimes you're not available or you're traveling, you're not around, so it might create an issue. And another big problem is the limited resources in both staff and funding that organizations can dedicate to fora in general. Now, within the Syrian NGOs, there's also the problem of travel, not only as funding, but as you know, it's very difficult for Syrians to get visas or to get approval to travel to other locations where discussions about Syria are happening, and this is impeding the Syrian voice to always be present in the discussions about Syria. However, it's not, we were able to overcome some and others of these challenges, and we succeeded in several instances in having good coordination between ourselves, between different fora, and I'm going to mention two examples. One at the local level, when the Aleppo evacuation happened last December, it was the response to that evacuation was totally SNA-led together with the cluster support. I call that particular evacuation the WhatsApp response, because hundreds and hundreds of WhatsApp groups were created to respond and organize and put together how to help people that were leaving Aleppo. And that was a very good example of how Syrian NGOs, local NGOs, because they had their team on the ground present where the action was happening, were able to respond in a much better and more effective way. As far as the regional level is concerned, one sample can be the request for the whole of Syria review. Syrian NGOs, together with some of the NGOs, were not very pleased of the way the UN was doing the assessment and the HRP, the Human Response Plan. So together with the UN in Turkey, we worked together and asked for a review of the whole of Syria mechanism that then led later to the HNO, the Humanitarian News Overview, and the HRP, the Humanitarian Response Plan that you now have for 2017. So hopefully the cooperation among all will continue to be good. People have to work together because one cannot work without the other.
We've got a question for you, and we'd like to know, it's more focused on humanitarian access, and how do you, through the NGO fora and NGO consortia, you try to address the issue of humanitarian access in areas controlled by non-state armed groups? And if you have any concrete examples of successful actions and policy that you have made through the forum yourself.
Yes, there have been lots of discussions about access. There are several impediments, as you all know, to access in certain areas of of Syria, not only because of presence of armed groups, but because sometimes of siege, areas under siege by the government of Syria or by other groups. So access is an issue that comes out in every single meeting that we have at all levels, be it local, global, international. Access is always, together with protection, number one topic on the list. Now, there have been several initiatives that were done at local level, and there have been other initiatives that were done from here. For example, the JOPs, or how to discuss with armed groups for access, have been developed specifically for Syria here in Turkey in cooperation with all parties involved, and there has been a capacity building exercise done to groups inside Syria. Now, very often this happens at a personal level or more at an organizational level, single NGO together with the groups that are controlling the area where it works. But recently we have come together, especially as Syrian NGOs, to set up a plan on how to respond all together to the limiting of access that are happening today in certain areas of Syria.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Rola. I'd like to invite now, actually, my co-host Emmanuel to share some information.
I would like to briefly introduce a new program for ICVA to support NGO fora. As you can see on your screen, ICVA will support NGO fora through 3 different ways: by supporting their organizational capacity development, thanks to support for strategic planning, governance, but also supporting the role of the NGO forum coordinator, and also strengthening the NGO fora advocacy and echoing their voices at the regional level and at global level. And finally, this program will also promote the pivotal role of NGO fora through a global awareness campaign. If you want to know more about this program, you can click also on the link that appears on the bottom of your screen. And now we can move on to the Q&A session.
Okay, perfect. Thanks so much for that, Emmanuel. So yes, to kick off now our Q&A session, I'd like to turn now to our very first speaker. So back to you, Raphael. We have a pair of questions I would like to pose to you. First, we have one that was submitted by Michelle, who's based in the U.S. She was asking, what are, in your view, the greatest barriers that NGO fora and consortia face in reaching out to and engaging local actors? We've heard from a variety of different experiences, but then maybe to step back and reflect, Raphael, what from your perspective are some of the greatest barriers? And then a second question, which is a related one, and this is coming from Emmanuel, who's working in Nigeria. Is there synergy and a high level of trust between international and national or local NGOs? And if not, or in cases where there is not, how do NGO fora and consortia try to address this issue to increase or build solid partnerships between all kinds of NGOs? So again, an issue that has come up in some of the other presentations, the other questions, but what would be your perspective on these questions, Raphael? Over to you.
Thank you very much for that, Angara. Just to answer the first question, I would actually take the example of ICVA. As you know, ICVA is a global consortium of NGOs, meaning that our membership is composed of both international NGOs and national NGOs. And our objective at ICVA, at least since a few years, is to try to engage more with local NGOs, national NGOs, NGOs from the global south. In regards to the obstacle we face here, it's very simple. If you want to engage in a group, in a collective, especially at the global level, an NGO needs some resources. It is not easy to actually be able to follow what was the World Humanitarian Summit, what we call now the Grand Bargain, the Global Compact for Refugees, and so on. It asks a lot of resources from the NGO side. So one thing is, of course, the lack of capacity of some NGOs, not only local NGO, by the way, but as well smaller NGO in the Western world. So that's one thing. The other thing is a mirror effect somehow, and that de facto the biggest NGO will be more present in during meetings. And the last point I just wanted to mention, and I think this webinar is a very good example, it's what is linked to technology. A lot of discussion at the global level takes place in Geneva, in New York, for instance, or maybe in London or some key places like that. So it's always easier to meet face-to-face with people. And who you're going to find in this location? Again, not NGO from the south. So all what we've tried to put in place at ICVA, it's more investing in technology to ensure that actually we can have contact and dialogue with people from all over the world. And I think we can really be based on this capacity that internet gives us today to promote some kind of interaction. Just to move on to your second part on the question of links between international and national NGOs and the role of a consortium or a forum in this kind of situation. The first thing I would like to highlight is that a forum, again, is driven by NGO themselves. So it's the members asking a secretariat, a forum, a consortium to focus or not on specific issues. So if there is a wish from a forum, a consortium, or for NGO members of a consortium and a forum to actually promote more partnership between local NGO and international NGOs, then they should really empower the forum or the consortium to do so. I really want to highlight that as NGOs, we cannot just hope that a consortium and a forum will do something for us if we don't give to this body the credibility and the resources resources to actually do this kind of thing. And I want to pick up on what has been mentioned by some of my colleagues about one of the key added value of a consortium or a forum. I see one, which is among plenty of others, of course, but one which is helping NGOs to think about different issues. And I think in this question of better partnership between international and national NGOs, I really believe that a forum in country or a consortium as ICVA could just help think, could help NGOs think about this issue in a better way. Pansy was talking about the dialogue between INGOs and national NGOs in Myanmar. We can take the example, of course, of Pakistan. I don't know if we have friends from Pakistan here, where really I think fora are instrumental in trying to create better dialogue between those two groups of NGOs. Thank you.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Raphael. So we have a lot of questions that are coming in. So as is often the case, we're going to be following up on many of these questions. Actually, after the event, we'll be asking our experts to help put together responses in writing, and we'll share those with all of our participants in the follow-up after the event. But we do have a few more minutes now, and I'd like to give the floor over to my co-host, Emmanuel.
Start with a question for Raphael, Abdurrahman, and also Pansy, for the three of you. So someone is asking from France if there is a critical threshold for the number of members to be part of a consortium. Raphael?
Yeah, I guess talking from an ICVA perspective, I should say no, considering that we have more than 100 members. Now, to be a bit more focused and serious, I do not think there is any limitation. I think it refers to what objective and what priorities we want to give to a forum or a consortium. We need to acknowledge that if in a forum we have more than 200, 300, 400 NGOs, the way to work together will be different, and therefore the priorities and the objective of the forum will be different. So I will really put that in perspective with what kind of mandate the NGO will give to a forum. Taking the example of ICVA, I think it does make sense to have such diversity within ICVA, as one of our key roles is actually to pass information to NGOs about what is happening at the global level. And therefore, if we can disseminate this information to as many NGOs as possible, I think we do fulfill our mandate.
Thank you, Raphael. Then I'm turning to Pansy to know if you have an answer to that.
Yeah, the limited number of consortia. You know, in Myanmar, as I had highlighted in my presentation, there is a big opportunity for the consortia to work together, but we do lack a lot of unity here. So we need to work more on getting both the NGOs, the local NGOs together to work in a consortia, as well as to improve the linkage between the local and the international, so that we will be working collectively and having one voice instead of having diverse voices as it stands now.
Thank you, Pansy. Abdurrahman, do you think there is a limited number of members for your consortium?
No, I don't think, because you always start with a smaller number and then grow bigger and bigger as the relevance is. So it really depends on the context, but I would assume that 10, 15 should be enough to start a consortium, and then as others will get on board. And generally what you see is that the similar, I mean, amongst international NGOs, it's always the same NGOs that join the consortium. So I think automatically they would join necessarily because they see the added value in that. But yeah, certainly, for example, if you have 2-3 NGOs present in an area or in a country, let's say, I don't think you necessarily need that, because they will anyway automatically talk to each other and speak to each other. But maybe yes, have a small number that where you think it's plausible to start a consortium. Also because, you know, what we say a lot in our membership is that, you know, anything that we do is member driven. So if the members are not there to drive the advocacy, to drive the activities that we're doing and so on, it will be difficult to do those activities.
Thank you very much for your answer. I've got another question for all of you, actually, regarding the local leadership and capacity building. Yes, I've got another question for all of you. So this question is coming from Raman in India, who is asking, there are some networks and fora in which INGOs, the UN and donor agencies have a predominant role, and therefore local and national organizations cannot easily share their perspective and voices. How do the various existing fora and networks ensure that local humanitarian leadership is strengthened in countries of operation? Do you also invest into local capacity building? Raphael?
tricky and important question for sure. I mean, this issue of what we call today the localization is not something that's going to be solved overnight. There is a strong push now to have more space and more voices of non-INGOs on the table in addition to UN and donors. So concretely, how do we do that? First, it is not easy. It will take a lot of time. And I feel that it can be tackled through three main issues. One is the willingness of non-local NGOs to actually give space to others. And this will mean for these actors to be able to step back and to really open the table seriously and not just to do it for the sake of doing it. The second thing is, of course, to support some NGOs, some local NGOs, to get more knowledge and resources. It's a lot about who has actually the capacity to follow what are the discussions at stake. With one staff working on policy, you can't think you will be able to actually follow what is happening around the world when it comes to humanitarian policy. And then the third point that I wanted eventually to look at, and I think this comes more to the overall question of the link of the relation between NGO and the current humanitarian system. We often see, not always, but a forum or a consortium as a way for NGO to connect with the current system. We need as well to think that NGO could be less dependent on the current system. I don't ask them to be in competition with the current system, but my point is to grow on its own and to try to be innovative in some approaches we could actually have. So we should not wait for the UN, for the donor to give more space to local NGOs. I think the NGO community could better be organized to offer more opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you, Raphael, and sorry because Abdurrahman has to leave. So thank you, Abdurrahman, anyway, for your presentation today and your participation in this webinar. My next question goes to Pansy, and would like to know how is your consortium funded?
Yes, funding is really the very big issue here in Myanmar. We are funded by various donors, and especially recently we are being funded by mainly by EU and also USA. The thing is, the challenges that we face, especially I'd like to share here, one experience that especially our consortia, let's say the local resource center, had faced some funding discontinuity in 2015 when we had the general elections. There was a wait-and-see attitude by many donors, and therefore we had this funding gap for one whole year. So this is something that we like to also share with everybody, that we need to also be ready for incidents as such. We need to prepare ourselves so that NGOs can continue to function without the sustained funding from the donors. This is the reason why we are now looking at the private sector funding, especially the funding resources that are actually available in country, because especially in Myanmar, we have this, the new government had introduced this mechanism of having the private sector provide the CSR funding for at least 2% of the profit every year. We learned that this is a lot of money sitting in country. So we are actually, trying to reach out to that pot of funds. And if that can be utilized properly, we believe that funding constraints by some of the NGOs and local CSOs can have access to that funding. So this is just sharing our experience, and we believe that sustainability of funding is very much important for sustainability of the CSOs. Often once the funding gap exists, then the CSOs dies. So we don't want that to happen. So we've got to be preparing ourselves to ensure that there is continuity for every CSOs in the country.
Thank you very much, Pansy. I've got a question for you, Rula, coming from Beatrix, as your organization is a member of an NGO forum. She would like to know how regional or global NGO consortia make sure that local, national, and smaller NGOs are represented and can participate in decision making. What would be your perspective on that?
Thank you for the question. It's a very important one because we always advocate for more presence of local and national NGOs. The first first, let me clarify one thing. When we say local NGOs in the context, the cross-border response, we are talking about Syrian NGOs working inside Syria, but being physically present in Turkey. So it's a different definition than the national NGOs, which would be the Turkish NGOs working in Turkey with the refugees inside Turkey, for example. So what we try to do, and here is the importance of the, if I can say a little bit, the bigger Syrian NGOs that have more means, is to try to get the voice of the Syrian NGOs as far and wide as possible. Unfortunately, because of the restrictions that I mentioned earlier, it is very difficult for Syrian NGOs to be present even at regional level especially because of visa issues and problems with traveling, so that they can physically be sitting there and having their voice heard. So what we try to do is, through the people that can travel, we send representations from NGO Forum, from the SNA, from other entities, and from NGOs themselves to speak in the name and with the voice of the other smaller NGOs.
Yes, you did. Thank you very much, Fula. And I've got a last question for Raphael. I would like, could you please share with us any example of successful collective action achieved through a forum or a consortium?
Well, the one I know the most is focusing on what ICVA does. So I just would like to highlight, for instance, our current work, which is called Less Paper, More Aid, which is looking at working with donors that they could harmonize their reporting requirements, which is something very important for all NGOs, whether it is international or national NGOs. And how we did that as a network, as a consortium, it's basically our members who came to us and said, this is important. This is something we should actually work on together. And ICVA took a leading role here. So it's something that we've been working on for the last 2 years, and we hope that in the coming 2 years we're going to see some very concrete results. And this shows very much how one NGO come together, the weight that they could have in putting some issue on the table and really working positively with others to try to solve some specific issues. Another example I would like to take is not about ICVA, it's actually about Myanmar. Maybe Pansy can react to that. There have been some difficulty in Myanmar of relationship between the UN and NGO, to make it very short. And I think here the NGO fora in Myanmar have been really capable to understand what the issue at stake and finding some proper and concrete solutions with the NGO community and as well with the UN. We supported them in this way, which led to a slightly adjustment of the coordination system. And now there is definitely a more solid and trustful relation between all humanitarian stakeholders in Myanmar, even if still a lot needs to be done. So I know we don't have a lot of time, Emmanuel. So these are the two examples I would like to highlight: one at the global level and one very concrete at the national level.
Okay, very good, and thank you so much, Raphael. We're going to have to wrap things up. As you say, we are unfortunately running out of time for today's session. It's been a really great conversation, so thanks to everyone for being a part of that. I would like to remind all of you, as mentioned previously, the audio and video recordings, as well as all of the mentioned resources from today's session, will be available in the next few days on the event webpage. And once translated, the video recording as well will be available in Arabic.
We'll put later together a briefing paper on the topic of today, and it will be available in English, French, and Arabic.
And then after the summer break on the 14th of September, we're going to be hosting the next session in this learning stream on humanitarian coordination. We'll be focusing on ICVA's role and engagement with NGOs in order to improve humanitarian coordination at the country, regional, and global levels. You can already register for this session by clicking on the banner you see in front of you, and as well for other upcoming sessions that will be coming up after the summer. You can click on any of the following banners. On the 5th of October, we'll be sharing information and potential implications of the so-called new way of working, a new policy approach adopted by 8 UN humanitarian and development entities aspiring to work towards collective outcomes across the humanitarian and development communities.
Previous session on the ISC and the humanitarian coordination coordination architecture at the global level, and the session that we had also at the country level coordination mechanism. You can now access the audio and video recordings of both events by clicking on each banner. Also, we recently published a briefing paper summarizing the main points discussed during the first session on the global humanitarian coordination architecture, and we will soon publish the one on the coordination structure at the country level.
Very good. So with that, thank you so much to my co-host Emmanuel. It has been a pleasure as usual. Thank you to all of our speakers. Great to have your insights on the line. We look forward to welcoming you back, hopefully in the near future. A huge thanks to the teams, both with PHAP and with ICVA, behind the scenes making this all possible. And then most importantly, thank you to the great active participation of all of our participants today, joining from all over the world. Really invaluable to have your insights as well. And thanks so much for being part of the discussion. We look forward to welcoming you next time. And with that, that's Emmanuel and Herod and the rest of the team here signing off from Geneva.